Question 1. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to say ball when shown a picture of a ball. The picture of the ball is the A. Response, B. Consequence, C. Stimulus, D. Reinforcer. Answer, C. Stimulus. This question asks about the components of a learning trial in ABA. The picture of the ball is the stimulus, which is something in the environment that comes before a behavior. The child's behavior of saying ball is the response, and anything that happens after the response is a consequence. In this case, the picture prompts the child's behavior. Think of the stimulus as the trigger for the behavior you are teaching. Question 2. Which of the following best describes a discriminative stimulus as D? A. A stimulus that signals reinforcement is available for a particular response. B. A stimulus that signals punishment is available for a particular response. C. A stimulus that evokes a response due to a history of pairing with a reinforcing stimulus. D. A stimulus that reduces the value of a reinforcer. Answer, A. A stimulus that signals reinforcement is available for a particular response. This question defines a key term in operant conditioning. An SD is a signal that tells you when a specific behavior will likely lead to a reinforcer. It sets the occasion for a behavior to occur, because that behavior has been reinforced in its presence before. For instance, a stop sign, SD, signals that pressing the brake pedal, response, will avoid a ticket or accident. Reinforcement, remember, an SD means now is the time to do this behavior to get reinforced. Question 3. A functional analysis involves manipulating A. Setting events, B. Antecedents and consequences, C. Topography and magnitude, D. Only consequences. Answer, B. Antecedents and consequences. This question focuses on the core components manipulated during a functional analysis. A functional analysis is a type of functional assessment where the behavior analyst directly tests the function of a behavior by systematically changing what happens before, antecedents, and after, consequences, the behavior, by seeing how the behavior changes when different antecedents and consequences are present. The analyst can determine why the behavior is happening. For example, they might test if attention, consequence, following a behavior increases that behavior, suggesting its function is attention. Remember, functional analysis is about actively testing the relationship between antecedents, behavior, and consequences. Question 4. A child is taught to say apple when shown a picture of an apple, banana when shown a picture of a banana, and grape when shown a picture of a grape. This is an example of training. A. Simple discrimination, B. Generalization, C. Stimulus control, D. Response generalization. Answer, C. Stimulus control. This question describes a situation where different stimuli reliably occasion specific responses. Stimulus control occurs when a behavior happens more often in the presence of a specific stimulus, an SD, than in its absence. In this scenario, the picture of the apple controls the response apple, the picture of the banana controls the response banana, and so on. Each picture acts as a specific SD for a specific word. This demonstrates that the stimuli, pictures, are controlling which response occurs. Question 5. Presenting the target stimulus along with a prompt, then gradually fading the prompt is known as A. Shaping, B. Chaining, C. Stimulus fading, D. Prompt fading. Answer, D. Prompt fading. This question describes the process of reducing assistance after a behavior is learned. Prompt fading is a procedure where the level of prompting is gradually reduced as the learner becomes more independent. This helps the learner's behavior come under the control of the natural stimulus rather than the prompt. For example, if teaching a child to write their name, you might initially provide hand-over-hand assistance, prompt, then move to a lighter touch, then just point, and finally remove the prompt altogether. This ensures the skill happens because of the instruction or cue, not because of your help. Question 6. Behavior is defined as A. Anything a person says or does. B. Internal thoughts and feelings. C. A person's personality traits. D. Only observable actions. Answer. A. Anything a person says or does. This question asks for the definition of behavior in ABA. Behavior is broadly defined as any observable and measurable act of an organism. This includes not only physical actions but also verbal behavior, saying things, and physiological responses that can be measured. Thoughts and feelings are not typically considered behavior itself in this definition unless they are reported. Verbal behavior, or measured physiologically, in ABA, we focus on behavior because we can see and measure it to understand and change it. Question 7. Reinforcement is a process that A. Decreases the future probability of a behavior. B. Increases the future probability of a behavior. C. Has no effect on the future probability of a behavior. D. Only applies to desirable behaviors. Answer. B. Increases the future probability of a behavior. This question defines the fundamental concept of reinforcement. Reinforcement is a consequence that follows a behavior and makes that behavior more likely to happen again in the future under similar conditions. It doesn't matter if the behavior is good or bad. If a consequence makes it happen more often, it is reinforcement. For instance, if a child asks nicely for a cookie and gets one, and this makes them more likely to ask nicely in the future, getting the cookie is reinforcement. Remember, reinforcement strengthens behavior. Question 8. A primary reinforcer is one that A. Is learned through pairing with other reinforcers. B. Requires prior learning to be reinforcing. C. Is naturally reinforcing without prior learning. D. Always involves social praise. Answer. C. Is naturally reinforcing without prior learning. This question distinguishes between types of reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are things that are inherently reinforcing because they satisfy basic biological needs or desires, such as food, water, warmth, or comfort. Their reinforcing value doesn't depend on being paired with anything else. For example, a hungry person doesn't need to learn that food is good. It's naturally reinforcing. Think of them as unlearned reinforcers. Question 9. Generalization occurs when A. A behavior happens less often in the presence of specific stimuli. B. A learned behavior occurs in new situations or with new stimuli not present during training. C. A behavior is followed by a consequence. D. A behavior is reduced or eliminated. Answer. B. A learned behavior occurs in new situations or with new stimuli not present during training. This question defines generalization, which is crucial for skills to be useful outside of the training environment. Generalization is when a behavior learned in one situation occurs in other similar situations or when exposed to different but related stimuli. For example, if a child learns to say dog when they see their pet dog and later says dog when they see a different dog at the park, that's stimulus generalization. If they learn to wave goodbye and then wave goodbye to different people, mom, dad, teacher, that's also generalization. Generalization means the learning spreads beyond the exact training conditions. Question 10. An establishing operation, EO, is an environmental event that A. Signals the availability of reinforcement. B. Increases the value of a reinforcer and increases the likelihood of behaviors that have produced that reinforcer. C. Decreases the future probability of a behavior. D. Prompts a specific response. Answer. B. Increases the value of a reinforcer and increases the likelihood of behaviors that have produced that reinforcer. This question asks about the effects of an establishing operation, a type of motivating operation. An EO makes a reinforcer more valuable and also makes behaviors that have previously resulted in that reinforcer more likely to occur. For example, if you are really hungry. EO of food deprivation. Food becomes a stronger reinforcer, and you are more likely to engage in behaviors that have gotten you food before, like going to the kitchen or asking for a snack. EOs change the effectiveness of consequences and influence the rate of related behaviors. Question 11. Which measurement method records every instance of a behavior? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Frequency. Event recording. Answer: D. Frequency. Event recording. This question is about different ways to measure behavior. Frequency, also known as event recording, involves counting the number of times a specific behavior occurs within a defined observation period. It's used for behaviors that have a clear beginning and end and don't happen continuously for long periods. The key is that you are counting each time the behavior happens. For example, counting every time a student raises their hand in class. Question 12. A schedule of reinforcement where every instance of a behavior is reinforced is called A. Intermittent reinforcement. B. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. C. Ratio schedule. D. Interval schedule. Answer: B. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. This question describes the simplest and often initial schedule of reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement, CRF, means that every single time the target behavior occurs, it is followed by the reinforcer. This schedule is often used when teaching a new skill because it helps the learner quickly learn the connection between the behavior and the consequence. For example, give a child a sticker every single time they put a block in the shape sorter correctly. Question 13. The process of gradually reinforcing successive approximations toward a target behavior is known as A. Chaining. B. Shaping. C. Fading. D. Prompting. Answer: B. Shaping. This question describes shaping, a common procedure used to teach new behaviors that the learner doesn't currently exhibit. Shaping involves reinforcing behaviors that are closer and closer to the desired final behavior, while no longer reinforcing previous, less accurate approximations. For example, to teach a child to say water, you might first reinforce any sound that sounds closer to wall, then wa, then wah, and finally only reinforce water. You are shaping the behavior into its final form. Question 14. When a behavior decreases because a reinforcing stimulus is removed following the behavior, this is called A. Positive punishment. B. Negative punishment. C. Positive reinforcement. D. Negative reinforcement. Answer: B. Negative punishment. This question asks about a specific type of consequence that reduces behavior. Punishment is a consequence that decreases the future probability of a behavior. Negative punishment specifically involves the removal of the stimulus, something desired, following the behavior, which results in the behavior happening less often in the future. For example, if a teenager stays out past curfew behavior and their phone is taken away, removal of desired stimulus, and they are less likely to stay out late in the future, that's negative punishment. Question 15. Which type of graph is most commonly used in ABA to display changes in behavior over time? A. Bar graph. B. Pie chart. C. Line graph. D. Scatter plot. Answer: C. Line graph. This question asks about the standard visual representation of data in ABA. Line graphs, specifically cumulative records or standard acceleration charts. Types of line graphs are most frequently used in ABA because they clearly show how a behavior changes across time and interventions. The x-axis typically represents time, sessions, days, weeks, and the y-axis represents the measure of behavior, frequency, duration, percentage, This allows for easy visual analysis of trends and the effects of intervention. Question 16. A behavior analyst is trying to decrease a child's hitting behavior. Each time the child hits, the analyst removes a preferred toy for 30 seconds. If the hitting decreases in the future, this is an example of A. Timeout, B. Response cost, C. Negative reinforcement, D. Extinction. Answer: A. Timeout. This question describes a specific consequence procedure. Timeout from positive reinforcement involves removing access to reinforcement for a specific period immediately following an unwanted behavior. In this case, removing the preferred toy serves as taking the child away from the potential reinforcement the toy provided. If the hitting decreases, this procedure functioned as punishment. Response cost also involves removing something earned, but timeout is a specific form often involving removal from an environment where reinforcement is available. Question 17. A motivating operation, MO, has two effects: a value-altering effect and a blank effect. A. Stimulus altering. B. Behavior altering. C. Consequence altering. D. Discriminative. Answer: B. Behavior altering. This question asks about the two main effects of a motivating operation, MO. And MO changes the effectiveness of a consequence as a reinforcer or punisher, value-altering effect, and also influences the frequency of behaviors that have been associated with that consequence in the past, behavior-altering effect. For example, being thirsty, MO, increases the value of water, value altering, and makes you more likely to ask for water or go get it, behavior altering. Question 18. When a previously reinforced behavior is no longer reinforced, resulting in a decrease in the frequency of the behavior, this process is called A. Punishment, B. Extinction, C. Response cost, D. Timeout. Answer: B. Extinction. This question describes the procedure of extinction. Extinction occurs when the reinforcement maintaining a behavior is withheld. When the behavior no longer produces the consequence that previously reinforced it, the behavior is expected to decrease and eventually stop occurring. For instance, if a child whines, behavior, to get attention, reinforcement, and the parent stops giving attention when the child whines, extinction, the whining should decrease over time. The key is removing the specific reinforcer that was maintaining the behavior. Question 19. Collecting data on the time elapsed from the onset of a stimulus to the initiation of a response is called A. Duration, B. Latency, C. Inter-response time, IRT, D. Frequency. Answer: B. Latency. This question defines a specific dimension of behavior measurement. Latency is the time between the presentation of a stimulus, like an instruction or cue, and the start of the behavior. For example, if you say, sit down, stimulus, latency would be the time until the person begins the action of sitting. It measures how quickly someone starts a behavior after being prompted. Question 20. The ethical principle that requires behavior analysts to design intervention plans based on scientific evidence is A. Do no harm. B. Be truthful/honest. C. Be just. D. Behave responsibly. Answer: D. Behave responsibly. This question relates to the ethical code guiding behavior analysts. The principle behave responsibly includes the requirement to use scientifically supported practices and design interventions that are effective and based on research. Using evidence-based interventions ensures that the services provided are likely to be effective and beneficial for the client. Relying on scientific evidence is a key part of responsible practice in ABA. Question 21. An S-delta, S, is a stimulus that signals A. Reinforcement is available. B. Reinforcement is not available. C. Punishment is available. D. An establishing operation is in effect. Answer: B. Reinforcement is not available. This question asks about a specific type of stimulus in discrimination training. An S delta is a stimulus that is present when a particular behavior is not reinforced. The organism learns to discriminate between the SD, where reinforcement is available, and the S delta, where it's not. For example, a closed sign on a store door is an S delta for the behavior of pulling the door handle to enter. That behavior won't be reinforced. You won't get in. The S delta signals don't do the behavior now. You won't get what you want. Question 22. A behavior chain is a sequence of behaviors where A. Each step is reinforced independently. B. The completion of one step serves as the discriminative stimulus for the next step. C. Only the first step is reinforced. D. All steps occur simultaneously. Answer: B. The completion of one step serves as the discriminative stimulus for the next step. This question defines a behavior chain. A behavior chain is a complex behavior made up of a series of smaller steps that occur in a specific order. Each step in the chain produces a stimulus that acts as a signal, an SD, for the next step, and also serves as a reinforcer for the step it followed, until the final step produces the ultimate reinforcer. For example, brushing your teeth is a chain. Picking up the brush, step 1, is reinforced by having the brush in hand, which is also the SD for putting toothpaste on it. Step 2, and so on, until the final reinforcement of clean teeth. Question 23. Measuring the total time a behavior occurs during an observation period is called A. Frequency. B. Duration. C. Latency. D. Intensity. Answer: B. Duration. This question describes how to measure the length of a behavior. Duration is the total amount of time from when a behavior starts until it ends. This is useful for behaviors that last for a significant period, such as how long a tantrum lasts or how long a student stays on task. You measure the time the behavior occupies. Question 24. A scatterplot is a graph used to analyze the relationship between A. A behavior and specific times or events. B. Two different behaviors. C. The total count of a behavior. D. The steps in a task analysis. Answer: A. A behavior and specific times or events. This question asks about the specific use of a scatterplot in ABA. A scatterplot plots the occurrence of a behavior against specific time periods or external events. This helps identify if the behavior is more likely to occur at certain times of the day or on certain days, which can provide clues about potential antecedents or patterns. For example, plotting hitting behavior on a scatterplot might reveal it mostly happens during transitions or before lunch. Question 25. Punishment is a process that A. Increases the future probability of a behavior. B. Decreases the future probability of a behavior. C. Only applies to undesirable behaviors. D. Provides a consequence that is always aversive. Answer: B. Decreases the future probability of a behavior. This question defines punishment. Punishment is a consequence that follows a behavior and makes that behavior less likely to happen again in the future under similar conditions. Like reinforcement, it's defined by its effect on behavior, not whether the consequence is perceived as bad or involves pain. If a consequence makes a behavior happen less often, it's punishment. For instance, if touching a hot stove, behavior results in pain, consequence, and makes you less likely to touch it again, the pain functioned as punishment. Question 26. An unconditioned reinforcer is also known as A. Learned reinforcer. B. Secondary reinforcer. C. Primary reinforcer. D. Generalized reinforcer. Answer: C. Primary reinforcer. This question uses alternative terminology for a type of reinforcer. Unconditioned reinforcers are those that are naturally reinforcing without any prior learning history. They are effective because of biological needs or physiological makeup. This is the definition of a primary reinforcer. Things like food, water, warmth, and relief from pain are unconditioned/primary reinforcers. Question 27. The process of observing and recording behavior as it happens in its natural environment is called A. Indirect assessment. B. Direct observation. C. Functional analysis. D. Preference assessment. Answer B. Direct observation. This question describes a core method of data collection in ABA. Direct observation involves watching the client in their natural setting and recording instances of the target behavior and the events surrounding it, antecedents and consequences. In real time, this provides objective data about the behavior as it naturally occurs, unlike indirect methods like interviews or checklists. Observing the behavior firsthand is crucial for understanding its context and function. Question 28. Which of the following is an example of positive reinforcement? A. Taking away a chore because a child finished their homework. B. Giving a child a sticker for cleaning their room, which increases future cleaning. C. A child loses recess time for talking out, which decreases future talking out. D. A person takes an aspirin to relieve a headache, which increases future aspirin taking for headaches. Answer B. Giving a child a sticker for cleaning their room, which increases future cleaning. This question asks you to identify an example of positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement involves the addition of a stimulus, something desirable, following a behavior, which results in that behavior increasing in the future. In option B, the sticker is added after cleaning, and if cleaning increases, it's positive reinforcement. Option A is negative reinforcement, removal of chore. Option C is negative punishment, removal of recess. Option D is negative reinforcement, removal of headache. Positive reinforcement means adding something good to increase the behavior. Question 29. A client is learning to follow two-step instructions. The behavior analyst says, "Get your coat and hat." This instruction is an example of A. Reinforcer. B. Consequence. C. Response. D. Stimulus. Answer D. Stimulus. This question asks about the role of the instruction in a learning trial. The verbal instruction, "Get your coat and hat," is something delivered by the behavior analyst before the client is expected to perform the action. This makes it a stimulus, specifically an antecedent stimulus. Stimuli are events or conditions in the environment that occur before a behavior. The instruction serves as the cue for the client to perform the requested actions. Question 30. A token economy is a system where A. Clients earn tangible items immediately after a behavior. B. Clients earn generalized conditioned reinforcers, tokens, that can be exchanged for backup reinforcers. C. Clients lose tokens for inappropriate behavior. D. Reinforcement is delivered on a continuous schedule. Answer B. Clients earn generalized conditioned reinforcers, tokens, that can be exchanged for backup reinforcers. This question describes the core mechanism of a token economy. In a token economy, individuals earn symbolic items or points, tokens, for engaging in target behaviors. These tokens are not reinforcing in themselves, but gain reinforcing value because they can be exchanged later for a variety of preferred items, activities, or privileges. Backup reinforcers. It's a system using generalized conditioned reinforcement. Earning points for good behavior to trade for extra screen time is an example. Question 31. An anecdotal record, ABC data, typically records. A. Only the behavior. B. Only the consequence. C. The antecedent, behavior, and consequence. D. The duration and frequency of the behavior. Answer C. The antecedent, behavior, and consequence. This question asks about the components collected in an ABC data collection method. ABC stands for Antecedent Behavior Consequence. This direct observation method involves writing down what happened immediately before the behavior. Antecedent, a description of the behavior itself, behavior, and what happened immediately after the behavior. Consequence, this helps hypothesize the function of the behavior. For example, antecedent, told to clean room, behavior. Child yelled and threw toy. Consequence, parent stopped asking child to clean room. Question 32. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, DRI, involves A. Reinforcing any behavior other than the target behavior. B. Reinforcing a behavior that cannot physically happen at the same time as the target behavior. C. Reinforcing the target behavior at a lower rate. D. Punishing the target behavior while reinforcing an alternative behavior. Answer: B. Reinforcing a behavior that cannot physically happen at the same time as the target behavior. This question describes a specific differential reinforcement procedure used to reduce problem behavior. DRI involves reinforcing a behavior that is physically impossible to do at the same time as the problem behavior. For example, if the target behavior to decrease is hitting, you might reinforce the individual for keeping their hands in their pockets. As you cannot hit someone while your hands are in your pockets, you are reinforcing an incompatible alternative. Question 33. A fixed ratio, FR, schedule of reinforcement provides reinforcement. A. After a fixed number of responses. B. After a variable number of responses. C. After a fixed amount of time. D. After a variable amount of time. Answer: A. After a fixed number of responses. This question asks about a specific type of intermittent reinforcement schedule. A fixed ratio schedule delivers reinforcement after a constant, predetermined number of responses. For example, an FR5 schedule means the reinforcer is delivered after every fifth correct response. This schedule often produces a high rate of response with a brief pause after reinforcement. Think of it as get paid every 5 times you do the job. Question 34. The definition of a behavior must be A. Subjective and easy to understand. B. Based on assumed internal states. C. Observable and measurable. D. Focused only on negative actions. Answer: C. Observable and measurable. This question highlights a critical requirement for defining behaviors in ABA. For a behavior to be studied and changed using ABA principles, it must be defined in a way that it can be seen or heard and counted or timed. This ensures that different people observing the behavior can agree on whether or not it occurred, which is essential for collecting accurate data and assessing the effectiveness of interventions. An operational definition must be objective, clear, and complete. Question 35. When a behavior is reinforced after an average number of responses, it is on A. Fixed ratio, FR, schedule. B. Variable ratio, VR, schedule. C. Fixed interval, phi, schedule. D. Variable interval, VI, schedule. Answer: B. Variable ratio, VR, schedule. This question describes another type of intermittent reinforcement schedule. A variable ratio schedule delivers reinforcement after a number of responses, but that number varies randomly around an average. For example, a VR10 schedule means reinforcement happens on average after 10 responses. It might be 8, then 12, then 9, then 11. This schedule produces high, steady rates of behavior and is very resistant to extinction, like playing slot machines or gambling. Question 36. The ethical principle of beneficence requires behavior analysts to A. Avoid doing harm. B. Maximize benefits and minimize harm. C. Promote self-determination. D. Be truthful and honest. Answer: B. Maximize benefits and minimize harm. This question asks about the ethical principle of beneficence. This principle mandates that behavior analysts strive to do good and ensure their services are beneficial to clients while actively working to prevent or minimize any potential negative effects. It's about weighing potential risks and benefits and always prioritizing actions that lead to the greatest positive outcomes for the client. It's not just about avoiding harm, but actively promoting well-being. Question 37. A conditioned reinforcer is a stimulus that becomes reinforcing through A. Biological necessity. B. Pairing with an unconditioned or previously established conditioned reinforcer. C. Instinct. D. Automatic shaping. Answer B. Pairing with an unconditioned or previously established conditioned reinforcer. This question explains how conditioned reinforcers acquire their reinforcing properties. Unlike primary, unconditioned reinforcers, conditioned reinforcers are initially neutral stimuli that become reinforcing because they have been repeatedly presented just before or at the same time as a known reinforcer. For example, the sound of a treat bag opening, neutral stimulus, becomes a conditioned reinforcer for a dog because it's been paired with getting a tasty treat. Primary reinforcer. Money and praise are common human conditioned reinforcers. Question 3.8. Taking data on whether a behavior occurred at any point during a specific interval is called A. Frequency recording. B. Duration recording. C. Partial interval recording. D. Whole interval recording. Answer C. Partial interval recording. This question describes a specific interval recording method. In partial interval recording, you divide the observation period into equal intervals and simply mark if the behavior occurred at least once during that interval, regardless of how long it lasted or how many times it happened. This method is often used for behaviors that don't have a clear start or end or happen at a high rate. It tends to overestimate the occurrence of behavior. Question 39. A functional assessment aims to identify the blank of a behavior. A. Topography. B. Function. C. Intensity. D. Location. Answer B. Function. This question gets to the core purpose of a functional assessment. A functional assessment is a process used to determine why a behavior is occurring. It seeks to identify the relationship between the behavior and the environmental events that precede it, antecedents, and follow it, consequences. Understanding the function, the purpose the behavior serves for the individual, is critical for developing effective intervention plans. Common functions include gaining attention, accessing tangibles, escape/avoidance, and automatic reinforcement. Question 40. Deprivation is a type of motivating operation that A. Decreases the value of a reinforcer. B. Increases the value of a reinforcer. C. Signals the availability of punishment. D. Signals the availability of reinforcement. Answer B. Increases the value of a reinforcer. This question asks about one way a motivating operation can affect a reinforcer's value. Deprivation occurs when someone has not had access to a particular reinforcer for some time. This lack of access typically makes that reinforcer more potent or valuable. For example, being deprived of food makes food a more effective reinforcer. Deprivation makes you want something more. Question 41. Which dimension of behavior refers to the physical form or shape of the behavior? A. Frequency. B. Duration. C. Latency. D. Topography. Answer D. Topography. This question asks about a specific measurable characteristic of behavior. Topography refers to what a behavior looks like, its physical form or how it is executed. For example, the topography of saying hello might be the specific mouth movements and sounds made, or the topography of hitting might be an open hand striking a surface. It describes the observable movements involved in the behavior. Question 42. When a behavior occurs at a lower rate in the presence of an S than in the presence of an SD, this demonstrates A. Generalization, B. Discrimination, C. Shaping, D. Chaining. Answer: B. Discrimination. This question describes the outcome of discrimination training. Discrimination is demonstrated when an organism responds differently in the presence of different stimuli. Specifically, a behavior shows discrimination when it occurs more often, or only, in the presence of an SD compared to an S, where reinforcement is not available for that behavior. The learner has discriminated between the two stimuli. For example, stopping at a red light, SD for pressing brake, versus driving through a green light, S delta for pressing brake. Question 43. A behavior analyst decides to use response cost to decrease a client's yelling. This means the client will A. Be given an item for not yelling. B. Have a preferred item taken away when they yell. C. Be briefly removed from the area when they yell. D. Be given extra chores when they yell. Answer: B. Have a preferred item taken away when they yell. This question asks about the procedure of response cost. Response cost is a negative punishment procedure where a specific amount of a reinforcer the individual already possesses is removed contingent on the occurrence of the target behavior. The goal is to decrease the behavior in the future. Taking away a token points or a preferred item fits this description. Losing screen time for misbehavior is another example. Question 44. Which method of functional assessment involves asking the client or people familiar with the client about the behavior? A. Functional analysis. B. Direct observation. C. Indirect assessment. D. Experimental analysis. Answer: C. Indirect assessment. This question asks about a method used to gather information about a behavior's function without directly observing the behavior as it happens. Indirect assessment involves gathering information through interviews, questionnaires, or checklists completed by the individual displaying the behavior or by people who interact with them frequently, like parents, teachers, or caregivers. This provides initial hypotheses about the behavior's function, which can then be verified through direct observation or functional analysis. Question 45. A consequence that follows a behavior and results in a decrease in the future probability of that behavior is called A. Reinforcement. B. Punishment. C. Extinction. D. Stimulus control. Answer: B. Punishment. This question provides the definition of punishment based on its effect on behavior. Any stimulus or event that, when it follows a behavior, makes that behavior less likely to occur again in the future under similar conditions is a punisher, and the process is called punishment. It's crucial to remember that something is only a punisher if it decreases the future probability of the behavior. Question 46. A behavior analyst is trying to teach a child to wash their hands independently. They break the skill down into smaller steps: turn on water, wet hands, get soap, etc., and teach the child to perform the steps in order. This is an example of A. Shaping. B. Generalization. C. Discrimination training. D. Task analysis. Answer: D. Task analysis. This question describes the process of breaking down a complex skill into smaller, manageable steps. A task analysis involves identifying all the individual behaviors that make up a complex chain and the order in which they should be performed. This list of steps is then used to teach the complete skill, often through chaining procedures. Breaking down washing hands into discrete steps is a classic example of a task analysis. Question 47. Pairing a neutral stimulus with a reinforcing stimulus until the neutral stimulus becomes a reinforcer is the process of establishing A. Primary reinforcer. B. Unconditioned punisher. C. Conditioned reinforcer. D. Generalized reinforcer. Answer: C. Conditioned reinforcer. This question describes the process of classical or respondent conditioning applied to reinforcement. A neutral stimulus, something that doesn't initially function as a reinforcer, becomes a conditioned reinforcer when it is consistently presented immediately before or at the same time as an established reinforcer, either primary or already conditioned. Through this pairing, the neutral stimulus acquires the ability to reinforce behavior itself. The sound of a clicker becoming reinforcing after being paired with treats is an example. Question 48. Taking data on whether a behavior occurred at any point during a specific interval, but only marking if it occurred throughout the entire interval, is called A. Partial interval recording, B. Whole interval recording, C. Momentary time sampling, D. Frequency recording. Answer: B. Whole interval recording. This question describes a specific interval recording method used for behaviors that occur continuously. In whole interval recording, you divide the observation period into equal intervals, and you only record the behavior as occurring if it happened for the entire duration of that interval. This method is typically used for behaviors you want to increase, like staying on task, and tends to underestimate the actual occurrence of the behavior. Question 49. A client screams every time their parent leaves the room. The screaming stops immediately when the parent returns. The screaming increases over time. What is the likely function of the screaming? A. Access to tangibles. B. Escape. C. Attention. D. Automatic reinforcement. Answer: C. Attention. This question provides an ABC scenario and asks for the function. The antecedent is the parent leaving, potential deprivation of attention. The behavior is screaming, and the consequence is the parent returning, providing attention. Since the screaming increases over time following the parent's return, the attention, returning parent, is reinforcing the screaming. This fits the function of gaining attention. Question 50. Negative reinforcement involves A. The removal of a stimulus following a behavior, increasing the future probability of the behavior. B. The presentation of a stimulus following a behavior, increasing the future probability of the behavior. C. The removal of a stimulus following a behavior, decreasing the future probability of the behavior. D. The presentation of a stimulus following a behavior, decreasing the future probability of the behavior. Answer: A. The removal of a stimulus following a behavior, increasing the future probability of the behavior. This question defines negative reinforcement based on its operation and effect. Negative reinforcement occurs when a behavior is followed by the removal or avoidance of an aversive stimulus, something unpleasant. And this removal or avoidance makes the behavior more likely to occur in the future. For example, taking an umbrella behavior removes the aversive stimulus of getting wet in the rain, making you more likely to take an umbrella in the future. You're reinforced by the removal of something you don't like. Question 51. When teaching a behavior chain, teaching the steps in their natural order, one step at a time, and providing reinforcement upon completion of the mastered step is called A. Forward chaining. B. Backward chaining. C. Total task presentation. D. Shaping. Answer: A. Forward chaining. This question describes one common method for teaching behavior chains. In forward chaining, you teach the first step of the chain first, reinforcing its completion. Once the first step is mastered, you teach the first and second steps together, reinforcing completion of the second step, and so on, adding one step at a time in the natural sequence. The learner masters the chain from the beginning to the end. Question 52. A consequence is an event that occurs: A. Before a behavior. B. During a behavior. C. After a behavior. D. Independent of a behavior. Answer: C. After a behavior. This question asks for the definition of a consequence in behavioral terms. A consequence is anything that happens immediately following a specific behavior. Consequences are important because they influence the future probability of the behavior occurring again. They can be reinforcing, increasing the behavior, or punishing, decreasing the behavior. The timing relative to the behavior is key. Question 53. What is the purpose of a baseline phase in an ABA graph? A. To test the effectiveness of an intervention. B. To demonstrate generalization. C. To show the level of the behavior before intervention. D. To fade prompts. Answer: C. To show the level of the behavior before intervention. This question asks about the role of the initial data points on an ABA graph. The baseline phase is the period where data is collected on the target behavior before any intervention is implemented. This provides a clear picture of the behavior's frequency, duration, or other measure in its natural state. It serves as a comparison point to see if the intervention has an effect. The intervention phase data is then compared to the baseline data. Question 54. A behavior is said to be under stimulus control when A. It occurs only in the presence of an S. B. It occurs at a higher rate in the presence of a specific stimulus than in its absence. C. It occurs randomly across different stimuli. D. It is no longer reinforced. Answer: B. It occurs at a higher rate in the presence of a specific stimulus than in its absence. This question reiterates the definition of stimulus control. Stimulus control is demonstrated when a behavior occurs predictably under specific stimulus conditions. This means the behavior is more likely to happen when the SDE is present than when it is absent or when an S delta is present. The stimulus, the SDE, has acquired control over the behavior. The phone ringing, SD, controlling the response of answering it is an example. Question 55. Inter-observer agreement, IOA, is calculated to assess the extent to which A. The intervention plan is being followed correctly. B. The behavior definition is clear and objective. C. Different observers record the same behavior occurrence. D. The intervention is effective. Answer: C. Different observers record the same behavior occurrence. This question asks about the purpose of IOA. Inter-observer agreement is a measure of how consistently two or more independent observers record the same behavior during the same observation period. A high IOA percentage indicates that the behavior definition is clear and the observers are reliably recording the behavior when it occurs, which increases confidence in the accuracy of the data. It's a check on the reliability of the measurement system. Question 56. A prompt is a supplementary stimulus that A. Signals that reinforcement is available. B. Is added to increase the likelihood of a correct response. C. Functions as a reinforcer. D. Decreases the probability of a behavior. Answer: B. Is added to increase the likelihood of a correct response. This question defines a prompt. A prompt is an extra hint, cue, or level of assistance provided to a learner to help them perform a specific behavior correctly. Prompts are used during teaching to make it easier for the learner to make the desired response, and they are eventually faded out. Examples include verbal cues, gestures, physical guidance, or visual aids. Prompts are temporary supports to guide the learner. Question 57. When teaching a behavior chain, teaching the last step first, then the second to last step, and so on, until the first step is taught is called A. Forward chaining. B. Backward chaining. C. Total task presentation. D. Shaping. Answer: B. Backward chaining. This question describes another method for teaching behavior chains. In backward chaining, the behavior analyst completes all steps of the chain except the last one, which the learner performs and receives reinforcement. Once the last step is mastered, the analyst completes all steps except the last two, and the learner does the final two steps, receiving reinforcement after the very last step. This continues until the learner performs the entire chain independently. The advantage is that the learner always receives reinforcement immediately after completing their part of the chain. Question 58. A schedule of reinforcement where the first response after a fixed amount of time is reinforced is called A. Fixed ratio, FR. B. Variable ratio, VR. C. Fixed interval, FI. D. Variable interval, VI. Answer: C. Fixed interval, FI. This question asks about an interval schedule of reinforcement where the time period is constant. In a fixed interval schedule, reinforcement is available for the first response that occurs after a set amount of time has passed since the last reinforcement. For example, an FI 5-minute schedule means the first response after 5 minutes have passed gets reinforced. This schedule often produces a scalloped pattern of responding, with a pause after reinforcement and then an increasing rate as the end of the interval approaches. Question 59. Which ethical principle requires behavior analysts to protect the privacy and confidentiality of their clients? A. Be truthful/honest. B. Do no harm. C. Maintain confidentiality. D. Be just. Answer: C. Maintain confidentiality. This question relates to a specific ethical responsibility of behavior analysts. Maintaining confidentiality is the ethical obligation to protect sensitive client information and only share it with authorized individuals or with explicit client consent, except when legally mandated, example, reporting abuse. Protecting client privacy is fundamental to building trust and respecting client rights. Question 60. A conditioned punisher is a stimulus that becomes punishing through A. Biological necessity. B. Pairing with an unconditioned or previously established conditioned punisher. C. Automatic extinction. D. Being naturally aversive. Answer: B. Pairing with an unconditioned or previously established conditioned punisher. This question explains how conditioned punishers acquire their punishing properties. A conditioned punisher is an initially neutral stimulus that becomes punishing because it has been repeatedly presented just before or at the same time as a known punisher, either primary or already conditioned. For example, the word no, neutral stimulus, becomes a conditioned punisher if it's frequently paired with experiencing pain or losing privileges. Unconditioned or conditioned punishers. Question 61. When a behavior analyst records whether a behavior is occurring or not occurring at the very end of a specific interval, this is called A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Frequency recording. Answer: C. Momentary time sampling. This question describes another type of interval recording. In momentary time sampling, you divide the observation period into intervals, but you only look to see if the behavior is happening right at the moment the interval ends. You mark if the behavior is occurring exactly at that instant. This method is easier to use if you need to track multiple behaviors or individuals, but provides less precise data than continuous measurement or even other interval methods. Question 62. A variable interval, VI. Schedule of reinforcement provides reinforcement. A. After a fixed number of responses. B. After a variable number of responses. C. After a fixed amount of time. D. After the first response after a variable amount of time. Answer: D. After the first response after a variable amount of time. This question describes an interval schedule where the time period varies. In a variable interval schedule, Reinforcement is available for the first response that occurs after an amount of time has passed, but that time varies randomly around an average. For example, a VI 5-minute schedule means the first response after an average of 5 minutes gets reinforced. It might be 3 minutes, then 7, then 4, then 6. This schedule produces steady, moderate rates of behavior and is very resistant to extinction, like checking your email. Question 63. A generalized conditioned reinforcer is a conditioned reinforcer that A. Is biologically important. B. Has been paired with only one specific primary reinforcer. C. Has been paired with many different primary and conditioned reinforcers. D. Automatically reinforces any behavior. Answer. C. Has been paired with many different primary and conditioned reinforcers. This question describes a powerful type of conditioned reinforcer. A generalized conditioned reinforcer is a stimulus that has been paired with a wide variety of other reinforcers, making it effective as a reinforcer across many different conditions and motivating operations. Money is the most common example. Its value doesn't depend on being hungry or thirsty, but on the fact that it can be exchanged for food, drink, activities, etc. Attention and praise can also become generalized conditioned reinforcers. Question 64. When implementing a behavior plan, the behavior analyst should prioritize procedures that are A. Easiest for the staff to implement. B. Least restrictive and most likely to be effective. C. Most aversive to the client. D. Most convenient for the family. Answer. B. Least restrictive and most likely to be effective. This question relates to ethical considerations in intervention design. Behavior analysts are ethically required to recommend and implement interventions that are both effective in addressing the target behavior and the least restrictive to the client's freedom and rights. This means exploring positive, less intrusive strategies first before considering more restrictive ones, while always ensuring the chosen method has empirical support for its effectiveness. Client safety, dignity, and effective treatment are paramount. Question 65. Ratio strain can occur when A. Reinforcement is too frequent. B. The response requirement on a ratio schedule is increased too rapidly. C. The interval on a time schedule is too short. D. Extinction is implemented too slowly. Answer. B. The response requirement on a ratio schedule is increased too rapidly. This question describes a potential issue when using ratio schedules. Ratio strain happens when the number of responses required for reinforcement on a ratio schedule is increased too quickly or becomes too large. This can lead to pausing, hesitation, or even a complete stop in responding. It's like expecting someone to suddenly do 100 tasks for the same pay they used to get for 10. They might just give up. Question 66. A discrete trial is a teaching unit with a clear beginning and end consisting of A. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. B. Only a stimulus and a response. C. Only a behavior and a reinforcer. D. Multiple chained behaviors. Answer. A. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. This question describes the basic structure of a discrete trial, a common teaching format in ABA. A discrete trial has 3 distinct parts: an antecedent, the instruction or stimulus, the learner's response, the target behavior, and a consequence, what happens immediately after the response, often reinforcement or corrective feedback. This structure allows for clear presentation of stimuli and consequences and easy data collection on specific skills. Think of it as test greater than response, greater than consequence. Question 67. A behavior is said to be maintained by automatic reinforcement if A. It is reinforced by attention from others. B. It results in escape from a demand. C. It produces its own reinforcement without the mediation of another person. D. It results in access to tangible items. Answer. C. It produces its own reinforcement without the mediation of another person. This question describes the function of automatic reinforcement. Behaviors maintained by automatic reinforcement produce a reinforcing consequence directly from the behavior itself, without requiring another person to deliver the consequence. This often involves sensory stimulation or relief. For example, hand flapping might produce visual stimulation that is reinforcing, or scratching an itch provides relief. The behavior itself produces the reinforcing outcome. Question 68. The ethical principle of fidelity in ABA relates to A. Maintaining confidentiality. B. Providing services within one's scope of competence. C. Being truthful and accurate. D. Keeping promises and commitments. Answer: D. Keeping promises and commitments. While not explicitly listed as fidelity in the current BACB code, the concept of keeping promises, fulfilling responsibilities, and being reliable aligns closely with the principle of being trustworthy and operating with integrity. It means consistently doing what you say you will do, following through on commitments to clients and stakeholders, and maintaining professional standards. This builds trust in the therapeutic relationship. Question 69. Extinction burst refers to A. The sudden decrease in behavior after extinction is implemented. B. A temporary increase in the frequency, intensity, or variability of the behavior at the start of extinction. C. The re-emergence of a previously extinguished behavior. D. The reinforcement of a previously extinguished behavior. Answer: B. A temporary increase in the frequency, intensity, or variability of the behavior at the start of extinction. This question describes a common phenomenon that occurs when extinction is first implemented. When reinforcement for a behavior is suddenly stopped, it's common to see a temporary burst, where the behavior actually increases in how often, how strongly, or how many different ways it occurs before it starts to decrease. It's like trying harder or different things when something that used to work suddenly doesn't. Recognizing extinction bursts helps practitioners know the plan is working, even if it gets harder initially. Question 70. A skill is considered mastered when the learner performs the behavior. A. On a continuous reinforcement schedule. B. With prompts. C. Independently, consistently, and generalizes it. D. Only in the presence of the behavior analyst. Answer: C. Independently, consistently, and generalizes it. This question asks about the criteria for mastering a skill in ABA. True mastery means the learner can perform the skill correctly without any prompting, does so reliably whenever the appropriate situation or stimulus occurs, and can use the skill in different settings, with different people, or with variations of the materials. Generalization. Achieving independent and generalized performance is the goal of teaching. Question 71. Discrimination training involves reinforcing a behavior in the presence of one stimulus, the SD, and A. Reinforcing the same behavior in the presence of another stimulus, the S. B. Punishing the same behavior in the presence of another stimulus, the S. C. Not reinforcing the same behavior in the presence of another stimulus, the S. D. Reinforcing a different behavior in the presence of the S. Answer: C. Not reinforcing the same behavior in the presence of another stimulus, the S. This question describes the core procedure of discrimination training. It involves teaching a learner to differentiate between stimuli. You reinforce the target behavior when the SD is present, but you deliberately do not reinforce that same behavior when the S delta is present. This differential reinforcement teaches the learner that the SD signals when reinforcement is available for the behavior, while the S delta signals it is not. Question 72. The measurement of how much time passes between the end of one instance of a behavior and the beginning of the next instance of the same behavior is called A. Duration. B. Latency. C. Interresponse time, IRT. D. Frequency. Answer: C. Inter-response time, IRT. This question defines a specific temporal measure of behavior. Inter-response time, IRT, is the time elapsed between two consecutive occurrences of the same behavior. For example, if a child taps the table, behavior. IRT is the time from the end of that tap until the start of the next tap. It's a measure of the spacing between behaviors, often used when the goal is to increase or decrease the rate of a behavior by changing the pauses between occurrences. Question 73. A permanent product measurement involves A. Observing the behavior as it happens. B. Measuring the tangible outcome of a behavior. C. Asking someone about the behavior. D. Recording the duration of a behavior. Answer: B. Measuring the tangible outcome of a behavior. This question describes a convenient way to measure some behaviors without being present when the behavior occurs. Permanent product measurement involves counting or measuring the lasting effect that a behavior has on the environment. For example, instead of watching someone clean their room, you could measure the permanent product by counting how many toys are put away or how many items are on the floor afterward. The outcome remains after the behavior is finished. Question 74. A common unconditioned punisher for humans is A. Losing tokens. B. A loud noise. C. Pain. D. A stern look. Answer: C. Pain. This question asks for an example of a naturally punishing stimulus. Unconditioned punishers are stimuli that are punishing without any prior learning history. They are inherently aversive due to biology. Pain is a primary example. You don't need to learn that pain is something to avoid or escape from. It naturally functions as a punisher. Losing tokens, a loud noise, unless extremely intense, and a stern look are typically conditioned punishers. Question 75. The process of systematically reducing the physical properties of a stimulus prompt until it is no longer needed is known as A. Stimulus fading. B. Prompt fading. C. Shaping. D. Stimulus control. Answer: A. Stimulus fading. This question asks about a specific fading procedure focusing on the stimulus, not the prompt itself. Stimulus fading involves gradually changing a stimulus or adding a cue that helps the learner respond correctly, and then slowly removing or changing that stimulus back to its natural form over time. For example, if teaching a child to trace letters, you might start with thick lines and gradually make them thinner until the child can write independently. The stimulus, the line thickness, is being faded